But the two, so the two things kind of, the U.S. exit piece I will talk about. There is a system, U.S. visit, that was kind of started several years ago to try and get to this entry-exit problem. And again, the primary piece that has spurred that lately was a recent report that came out by the Government Accountability Office talking about how about 50% of the people that are in the country unlawfully right now are individuals who came here legally with legal visas, but then overstayed those visas. And so the questions have arisen on the Hill about, well, why don't we have the technology to be figuring out who these individuals are, tracking their visas, making, how do we know if they're still here or not, if they've left the country or they're, So there's a lot of questions around that. But the biggest thing that's getting traction right now is a system called E-Verify. And E-Verify is over 20 different types of databases that those two combined agencies access and trying to pull together the information for E-Verify. But basically, E-Verify is meant to be a tool for employers that allows an employer, so right now when you get a job, everyone fills out that I-9 form. We've all filled out that form. What the E-Verify system does is it takes the information from that I-9 form, it enters it into this online system, and then you get the green light, yes, you are authorized to work, or you get a red flag, no, this person is not authorized to work. And if an employer is using that system, every new person that they're hiring, regardless of citizenship status, it's whoever you're hiring, gets run through that system. And right now, probably about 3% of all the employers in the United States are using it. So I think that's about a little over 200,000 employers. Not a very large amount. The program has been around for 10 years, but still has a lot of issues related to, as you would guess, data accuracy. So there's a lot of inaccuracies that live in SSA and DHS and other commercial databases that also get access to this program. And so what you see is a lot of errors in the system. So people that are authorized to work not being authorized to work. And again, we're talking about a very fundamental right, the right to work. The right to get a job, and a computer system, a technology basically being kind of the final say in whether or not you are able to work. And I think there's, it matters right now, this discussion, because we just actually, day before yesterday, in the House of Representatives, Lamar Smith, who is head of the Judiciary Committee, introduced a mandatory E-Verify bill. This is a bill, so this would mandate use of the E-Verify system for every single employer in the United States. So, for example, if that happened tomorrow, everybody in this room would have to be run through E-Verify starting tomorrow. And of course, E-Verify is being pitched as the magic bullet that will stop illegal immigration. If employers have to check everybody, then they won't be hiring people who are undocumented. And we know through anecdotal evidence of what we've seen from mandatory E-Verify laws in states that that's not true. It doesn't happen that way. You've got not only false positive rates from the system, but you've also got false negatives. So right now, E-Verify, I believe, about 50% of the people that get confirmed to work through the system aren't actually authorized to work. Why? Because they're using false identity documents. And oftentimes those identity documents are from people that are lawfully authorized to work. So there's that issue, there's the inaccuracy issues generally, especially with commercial databases, in terms of the information that lives in commercial databases, and then that being kind of used to cross-check, and maybe it's not accurate, or requiring individuals to prove certain information of theirs based on those information in those commercial databases. There's actually a great article that came out, I don't know if anyone saw it on, I think it was Tuesday, from the New York Times about the big Citigroup breach. If anyone saw that, and I think for many of us, I think the FTC said, I wrote it down, identity theft has been the #1 complaint to the FTC in 11 consecutive years, with 1.3 million complaints in 2010. And so there's certainly a lot of identity theft concerns that get raised in the context of a mandatory E-Verify system, because there is a sense that there will be a much larger market for false identity documents, because people aren't actually leaving the United States, they're just going into the underground economy, or the market for false identity documents becomes much larger. Also 2 state databases. E-Verify right now has an agreement or a pilot program with at least 1 state Department of Motor Vehicles. And so what we've seen is more and more federal government database interface with state databases like the DMV, vital offices of vital statistics. There's a real push to try and not only centralize databases for vital statistics from all 50 states, but to allow the government, the federal government, to be accessing all of those databases as well. And certainly in the context of E-Verify, we've seen that come up a lot. The other big piece of E-Verify that we've been hearing more and more about is a push for a biometric card that would go hand in hand with E-Verify, or be, in some cases, depending on which member of Congress you talk to, would be a substitute for E-Verify. So instead of E-Verify, what we really need is everyone to have their biometric national ID card, which then shows that they're authorized to work. And then also, too, I'll say the last piece of kind of E-Verify is a new pilot program that DHS has started, which is called E-Verify Self-Check. It exists only in the District of Columbia, Virginia, and Idaho right now. It's getting piloted. And basically allows you, the individual, to check and see if you would get wrongly flagged by the E-Verify system by entering your information online and then answering certain questions about yourself. But the thing is that most of the information they're getting for these questions is from commercial databases. So if the commercial database, like I think Experian, you check your credit report, and maybe your credit report, again, like she was mentioning, I'm Rosella M. Martinez, but maybe in some places on my credit report, I'm just Rosella Martinez. Or maybe in some places, they only put 1 L in my first name instead of 2 letters. And so, or what was my college address? I don't know what my college address was. They'll ask you questions. Have you lived at this address? I don't know. That was, however long ago that was. So there's just a lot of issues that get raised. We are expecting fully that this bill will pass the House. The Republicans certainly have made it very clear that they do intend to pass a mandatory E-Verify bill out of the House in the next few months. We believe that that will happen, and so our battle will really be in the Senate in terms of trying to stop it. But I think that's enough for now if I got over the time.
It's fabulous information, Priscilla. As in this area, as in so many areas, immigrants are sort of the canaries in the coal mine. And the techno-utopianism that you talked about, and the way that this is a backdoor to a national identification system, has the civil liberties community and the privacy communities rightly very concerned.
And I also actually have a sign-on letter here,
Great.
if anyone wants to see it, from ACLU National. But I know like EPIC is probably going to be on here and some others. But if anyone's interested, I have copies here of that sign-on letter, and I can give you the information for the ACLU contact for that.
Wonderful. The other thing that you mentioned that is relevant to the area that Sharon Beeson from EPIC is about to talk to is in the employment credit area, is the way the government has a lot of information on us, but we don't have access to correct the records and so forth. So let's go to Sharon at EPIC.
Yes, actually there are quite a few things that, as you were saying, that I was thinking about, especially the sort of idea of technology as a shortcut. I mean, credit checks are not particularly new. There isn't some new technology such as E-Verify or sort of voting machines, but the use of credit checks by employers to screen job applicants has increased a lot recently, and this seems to be a function of easier access, as well as, again, trying to find a way to get the most reliable workers in this sort of shortcut fashion. And I'll get to this later on, but there are huge errors. And also this sort of over-reliance on the technology and the effect that has on vulnerable population, which right now, given the state of the economy, is a lot of people not being able to find work, having their credit score go down because of things that happen due to that, and then not being able to get a job because of their credit, which creates this really bad, vicious cycle. And specifically, there is an even greater impact on minority communities as they tend to have lower credit. So 60% of employees right now actually use credit checks to screen job applicants, which has gone up from 43% in 2006. And over the past 2 years, there's been a lot more attention to this issue. Newspaper articles, legislation introduced, and some lawsuits filed. And I should note, I'm focusing on credit checks but this is just one example of sort of technology invading privacy in and around the workplace employer-employee relationship. You know, employees looking at Facebook is what we kind of hear a lot about, monitoring work computers and work cell phones. There have been several big cases about that. By law, according to the Federal Credit Reporting Act, employers actually have to get permission to access your credit report when you apply for a job. But who isn't going to give permission when it's part of your job application? So that's sort of not much protection at all. And again, according to the FCRA, if your credit report is used for any adverse action, denying the job, rescinding a job offer, firing you, the employer has to give you a notice with a copy of your credit report explaining what happened. But again, nobody really knows if an employer doesn't comply with that provision. If you're not hired, you really would not necessarily assume it's because of your credit, and even if you did, you would always think, well, maybe I just wasn't qualified for some other reason. And these provisions I mentioned only apply if the employer uses a third-party screening company, not if they conduct the checks themselves, which, you know, it's becoming easier now with the personal data that's collected on job applications for the employer to actually sort of bypass most of the process and just go online and be able to find credit information for themselves. When an employer asks a credit agency for your credit reporting, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, they get information about your credit payment history and other credit habits. Basically anything on a standard credit notice, although they don't get always the exact score and they don't usually get your date of birth. It includes information about former addresses, previous employers, stuff they can use to check references that you may not have given to them for one reason or another. And I think, you know, it's important to note that there are lots of reasons that people have bad credit, and I'm sure everyone understands this. Like I said, loss of job, medical bills or disability, death in the family, divorce, and identity theft, which being the most complained things to FTC, one can imagine that not only are you going through this identity theft problem, but then your credit goes down, and then you can't get a job. And credit reports often contain mistakes. 25% of credit reports in 2005 had errors serious enough to cause someone to be denied a loan or employment. And I just read recently that it's becoming much, much harder to dispute a mistake in your credit, and this is because of sort of the way this process has been automated thanks to technology. A report by the National Consumer Law Center found that the dispute system that's, again, mandated by law has become so automated that it basically provides no protection for job applicants or employees. The report detailed how credit bureaus translate these detailed disputes that consumers have taken all this effort to write up into 2 or 3 digit codes. The companies fail to send documents provided by consumers, such as canceled checks, payout statements, to creditors or anyone else involved in the dispute. They don't examine documents, contact anyone by phone, or basically exercise any human discretion. And they basically shirk their investigative responsibility under the law. It's sort of a loop where they just sort of confirm that the data they have is the data that they already had in their database, issue a code, and they're done with it.
Sure, I really apologize for doing this, but we are running a little late, sure. So if you could wrap up.
Yeah, so the rest of what I was going to say was basically about the arguments for and against the use of credit checks and how employers make very general arguments about the connection between good credit, being a responsible employee, but the data doesn't bear that out, and several studies have shown no correlation for most jobs other than those directly involving money. The last thing I would say is that legislation is actually passed in several states, and over 20 states are actually considering bills limiting the use of credit checks by employers, and there is a federal bill that's also been in the works for a year or two.
Very good.